Good morning, because we still haven't hit lunch yet. My name is Hajar Darwish, and I'm going to be presenting on creating a needs assessment between LEND and ODI. So let's begin. Oh, okay. So there's no disclaimer, so I'm going to jump into it. So this is a presentation outline based on how it was in my paper. So we're just going to run through these sections and explore them a little bit more together. So a quick introduction, I can't see from this thing. Okay, a quick introduction. So this is a continuously building project between LEND and Opening Doors, Inc., also known as ODI. It was actually started by Hiba Hamedi, who is a UC Davis medical student right now. She was the health programs manager at the time, and then Hinajan, who is still a caseworker there, collaborating with Janice during the spring of 2022 to empower women in child development knowledge. And so for spring 2022, ADHD was decided upon for psychoeducational content, and the agreement was essentially to try and continue neurodevelopmental topics for the fall of 2022. And so that's what we're going to be speaking about. And then a huge thanks will be given furthermore in the developmental methods. Alrighty. So breaking down the literature review into 4 sections with a lot of pages. So the population, our population was refugees. So they're defined as displaced individuals who have crossed national boundaries and are unable or unwilling to return to their original country due to a fear of many different reasons as defined by the UN Health Commissioner for Refugees. And so we focus mainly on Afghan refugees. Afghan refugees have been escaping persecution since May of 2021, since Biden withdrew troops and the Taliban came in and took over. And so while the literature review does talk about Ukrainian refugees, because that's also something that interlapped during the time frame, Afghan refugees actually received more negative reception compared to Ukrainian counterparts, with one reason being symbolic threat, which is where people in the Western countries perceived Afghan refugees as a threat because they had the stereotype that Afghan refugees stem from a mainly Islamic country, presenting conservative ideas that would go against the Western liberal ideas. And Ukraine was opposite of that. So that's why we're focusing more on the Afghan refugees, although ODI also caters to Ukrainian refugees as well. Some characteristics of refugees is that they have prevalent diagnosis. The 3 top ones that are typically comorbid with one another is anxiety, depression, and PTSD. And then comorbidity among physical and mental health disabilities also exist. This population also lacks mental health utilization compared to the general population. And so some needs and barriers include the lack of basic needs. We're talking like food and shelter, physical and psychological basic needs. But the 2 barriers that actually exist are employment and language. They go hand in hand. If you don't speak English, you can't really find work. And if you find work, you kind of need to speak English. And that's something that we face, or I faced because I worked at ODI myself with my own clients. There's other barriers that exist, such as racism, discrimination, lack of medical coverage, Islamophobia, that these individuals face on the daily. So breaking down the services in the community, ODI is located in Sacramento, California, the nonprofit refugee resettlement. They do have 5 main programs to cater to refugees, but the one we're focusing on is the health program because it contains counseling, and it also has a 12-week women wellness cohort for Afghan women. And then with LEND, there's many different factions, but UC Davis is home to the Northern California LEND and in association with Sac State. And there's they provide leadership training and advocacy to various individuals from various sectors to help improve the future and advocate for individuals with autism and NDDs. And so that's why we're all here. And so the needs assessment, the purpose is essentially to communicate and develop a needs assessment based on the feedback and barriers that we encountered during the creation and implementation of the psychoeducational training on autism, which I'll go into further. And so this assessment will be used to address any future needs or barriers in the next upcoming psychoeducational content, as well as to continue building the bridge and advocating for other services between LEND and ODI. So when we break down the stakeholders, ODI has a lot of stakeholders, but the two that are focused on are the refugee clientele. They're the population for the needs assessment. And then we have a caseworker, because Hannah John was our caseworker, as well as interpreter, as well as our trusted main contact source between us and the women. For LEND, what's highlighted and seems to have escaped some of the page was the people that helped work on creating this. So the refugee women are the population, LEND trainees, me and Samaya, psychologist, Dr. Enriquez, and then developmental pediatricians or fellows, Dr. Jonathan, Dr. Jasmine, and then we have advocates, we have parents, pediatric residents, and the DEI committee. So before we begin, just want to give a huge thanks to Dr. Janice, Dr. Jasmine, Dr. Jonathan, Dr. Aubin, Vanessa, my mentor, Samaya, and Hinanabi. All of them were so amazing in helping me be able to create the content, have the educational content be presented, receive the feedback, and essentially write the needs assessment. So hopefully it can be used when we partner up again and try to create another NDD psychoeducational training with the Afghan women. So breaking down how the needs assessment was created, so I have down the 5 different sections of the barriers and the solutions that we came up with, and the questions that it ties into the needs assessment. So for lack of information, when we decided to choose the topic to focus on, we actually were deciding to do a focus group. There was logistical issues that were faced with the focus group. We had timing that we had to get it done. We did it in a full month. Big props to Dr. Jasmine for creating it too on such short notice. And so we chose autism, and we actually checked in with the women if this was a topic they were interested in and they had heard of it. There's something they wanted to discuss and to delve into that they had done. Issues that were faced is, so we assumed they had little to no knowledge on this topic. So everything that was within the training was as if you've never heard about autism. We're going to break this down with layman topic words. And then in the second training, we use the actual words from the DSM in case the one went to the doctors. Doctors don't usually use layman terms, unfortunately. And most of the time, these women don't have interpreters during the visits, although it is not everyone does it. So a solution is to actually assess what the women know about the topic and ensure it's addressed in the content, because during our first training, we actually had one woman, she had read something about autism and the correlation with inflammation. And so while the medical research paper did not say that inflammation causes autism, and while multiple times during our presentation that there's no one cause or one reason for autism, that was put into the chat. And so people started trying to figure out, how do I decrease inflammation so I can decrease autism or remove autism? And so that was something we weren't prepared for. So addressing what the women know, knowing if they have seen or heard anything, any hearsay on the topic, to make sure that it's addressed within the content, and not just put into the chat for everyone to start picking apart. Language was also a barrier. Our information on the slides was in English, and the physician presenting it, Dr. Jasmine, doesn't speak Dari. So thankfully for Hannah John, Samaya John, they were able to interpret, but this caused the training to be a little longer than usual, because Dr. Jasmine would speak the interpretation. Sometimes the women would speak to the interpreters, and then the interpreters would speak to Dr. Jasmine. The solution at the moment is essentially to just continue with an interpreter, unless there is an NDD physician that is bilingual and specializes in NDDs that can speak and answer at the same time. Technology has its pros and cons. It serves the women don't drive. And many of them actually have children. And so some were watching while cleaning. It was very great, but we did encounter some Zoom difficulty, which also limited the data collection. And by that, I mean some women didn't know how to raise their hands or unmute or mute. Um, and so people were talking over each other. We faced some frustration from some people that had their hands raised for a while, but other women were talking over them and they would explain their frustration in the chat. So a solution is actually just Zoom training, um, how to use the different functions, essentially be able to do more data collection other than a yes or no, which is what we had to stick to, and consider recording for those who could not come for this training. For the request of the interpreters and some of the women, they didn't want the recording they didn't want the trainings to be recorded, but some of the women that came later wanted to know what had happened, and because the slides weren't English and English isn't their first language, they couldn't understand what was going on, and so they also requested recording. Medical literacy is a barrier. There is a difference between Afghani, Middle Eastern, and in general American healthcare systems. Here in America, you go to the doctor once a year for your physical checkup. In Afghani, Middle Eastern societies, you go when you need to go. Insurance doesn't exist. If you have insurance, it covers everything. You don't have to battle with it like American healthcare systems does. And so um, there's a huge difference. And then learning how to use your insurance and what it covers and what it does is something to be considerate about. While we did provide resources and community-based resources within the second training, the assumption was that women had access to a medical care provider. But at the end of the session, Dr. Jasmine encountered questions about bedwetting, about nutrition, about specific foods in the food pyramid and what to eat, how to get their children to go to the doctor, how to go to. So we don't assume and ask if they do have access to a medical care provider, because most of the time they're figuring out insurance, because it's something I faced with my own client who was part of this cohort. And lastly, there was no compensation. So this was based on feedback from one of the participants who messaged me and said, hey, do you have a certificate of completion or just anything that I can say that I use for? Because we learn as much from them as they learn from us. And so while a certificate of completion it might be just a piece of paper, it can be used for something purposeful for employment, which is what we discussed before as something as a barrier. And we're hoping to be able to do the partnership with London ODIs so they can continue to grow on their path of knowledge, because education is also gatekept in this country as it is expensive. In terms of our evaluation method, the needs assessment is given to refugees who are currently or were previously part of the Women Wellness Cohort in the health programs. This is stored in ODI's confidential database, and they are contacted by Hinajan. This cohort is open to legal immigrants who have been in the US for 5 years or less, and they live in the Sacramento County. It is mainly for Afghan women because that is the major dominant population. So that's what the Women Wellness to. Which is on the next slide, is 10 Likert scale type questions, focusing on the challenges refugees may face or topics they would like more information about before creating a psychoeducational training. And the answers are a yes or no, just because there's data that is put out there that open-ended questions with refugees are difficult because they will tend to stick to no answer or a yes or no. And so essentially the needs assessment survey is given by the Women Wellness Cohort leader. So for us, that would be Hinajan. It's someone that they can trust and someone that they feel comfortable talking to. And so it can aid in some of the challenges listed below that may be encountered. So please answer yes to any items that you'd like to learn more about. Questions is what we discussed about assessing what the individual knows about this developmental disability, if they even want to learn about it. In order to gauge what the content should revolve around. Number 5 asks about access to the internet. ODI provides laptops and cell phones, but they don't provide the internet itself. And so figuring out if they first do have access to the internet before starting this. Number 6 is help learning how to use Zoom. And then 7 relates to the part. There's an interpreter in general, which is typically Hannah John. Samaya John did interpret as well for these 2 sessions. And then number 8 is I would like the training to be recorded, which ties into the internet and technology. And number 9 is not assuming, just checking in to find out if they do have a primary medical provider so they can pass the questions toward there and maybe be referred as well. Number 10 is I'd like a certificate of completion for this training. And these are my references. And then I'm Sarah, if you have any questions, please let me know. If not, my email is there too.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was founded in 1998 with the promise to reduce and prevent the disabilities that can be associated with autism and other neurodevelopmental conditions. Every day, our clinicians and researchers make progress on that promise. Our groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other conditions associated with disability are helping affected individuals achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website or our social media platforms to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.